Your soulmate is shaking in total shock right now. They lost all control after finding out you are. My beloved child, be still for a moment and allow your heart to rest. Before this story begins, remember that what you are about to read is a fictional devotional reflection inspired by Christian themes of grace, forgiveness, hope, and the transforming power of God's love. It is not a prophecy or a personal message from Jesus. Instead, let it encourage you to believe that God can use truth, humility, and kindness to change hearts in ways we never expect. There are moments in life when everything a person believes is suddenly challenged. It does not always happen through dramatic events or extraordinary miracles. Sometimes it happens because one hidden truth quietly comes into the light. A single conversation. A forgotten memory. An unexpected discovery. In one ordinary moment, years of assumptions begin to fall apart, and a heart that once felt certain realizes it has been seeing only part of the story. Your soulmate had been living with that kind of certainty. For years they believed they understood exactly who you were. They thought they had all the facts. They trusted the opinions they heard. They accepted explanations without asking deeper questions. Life continued moving forward, and they convinced themselves there was nothing left to discover. Yet beneath that confidence remained a quiet restlessness they could never fully explain. No matter how busy life became, certain memories always returned. They remembered your patience. They remembered your willingness to encourage people no one else noticed. They remembered how you quietly celebrated other people's victories without asking for recognition. Those memories never matched the story they had convinced themselves to believe. Whenever they tried to ignore those thoughts, another memory would appear. The time you stayed behind after everyone else had left just to help clean. The afternoon you comforted someone who had lost hope. The smile you offered to strangers without expecting anything in return. None of it made sense. If everything they believed about you was true, why did every genuine memory tell a completely different story? My beloved child, Scripture reminds us that wisdom begins with humility. Pride tells us we already know enough. Humility quietly asks, what if I still have something to learn? The Lord often softens hearts not by forcing answers upon them, but by gently revealing truths that invite honest reflection. One rainy afternoon, your soulmate received an unexpected phone call from someone they had not spoken to in several years. It was an old volunteer coordinator from a community outreach project where both of you had once served together. The conversation began with ordinary greetings. Then the coordinator said something that immediately captured their attention. I've been organizing old records from our outreach programs. While cleaning the storage room, I found something I think you should see. Your soulmate smiled politely. What is it? I'd rather show you than explain it. Curiosity replaced routine. The following morning they drove across town to the old community center. Very little had changed. Children still played in the courtyard. Volunteers still prepared meals for families. The small chapel still stood beside the garden where so many quiet conversations had once taken place. Walking through those familiar halls awakened memories that had remained asleep for years. The volunteer coordinator welcomed them warmly. I'm glad you came. So am I. Without wasting another moment, the coordinator led them into a storage room filled with carefully labeled boxes. One box rested alone on a nearby table. Across the front someone had written, "Volunteer Reflections." Your soulmate carefully lifted the lid. Inside were journals, photographs, thank you letters, handwritten notes from volunteers who had served throughout the years. Everything appeared ordinary until one leather notebook caught their attention. It looked familiar. Opening the first page, they realized every volunteer had been invited to write short reflections after each community project. Some entries thanked God for answered prayers. Others described lessons learned while serving. Many expressed gratitude for people whose kindness had made difficult days easier. As they slowly turned the pages, one name appeared. Yours. Their heartbeat quickened. Curious, they began reading. I thank God for teaching me that the strongest people are often the quietest. Today reminded me that serving others without expecting recognition brings a peace the world cannot offer. I pray I never lose the joy of encouraging someone who may never know how much they encouraged me in return. Your soulmate paused. That didn't sound like the person they had imagined. They continued reading. Another entry. Another prayer. Another reflection. Every page revealed someone who quietly trusted God, loved serving others, and consistently chose kindness over recognition. There was no bitterness. No pride. No desire for attention. Only gratitude. Only humility. Only faith. The coordinator watched silently before speaking. There's more. They turned several pages forward. This time the handwriting belonged to another volunteer. I've never met anyone who serves as faithfully as they do. They always notice the lonely person in the room first. Another page. They prayed with me after everyone else left. I'll never forget that kindness. Another. They stayed late again without telling anyone. Another. They quietly paid for groceries when one family couldn't afford them. Your soulmate stopped reading. Their hands trembled slightly. Every testimony described the same person. The person they thought they already knew. My beloved child, Jesus taught that a tree is known by its fruit. The consistent pattern of a person's life often reveals more than rumors, assumptions, or opinions ever could. Kindness repeated over time becomes a testimony stronger than words alone. For several minutes no one spoke. The room felt completely still. Finally your soulmate looked toward the coordinator. I never knew any of this. The coordinator smiled gently. That's because they never wanted anyone to know. They always believed the good they did belonged between themselves and God. Those words struck deeply. Everything your soulmate believed suddenly began falling apart. Not because someone argued with them. Not because anyone tried convincing them. But because evidence quietly replaced assumptions. They remembered every moment they had questioned your intentions. Every time they allowed someone else's opinion to shape their own. Every opportunity they missed to simply ask honest questions. Regret settled heavily upon their heart. Yet beneath the regret came something unexpected. Respect. a deeper respect than they had ever felt before. The coordinator reached into the box one final time. There is something else. It was an envelope sealed years earlier. Across the front appeared only one sentence. For anyone who ever wonders why we serve. Inside rested a handwritten reflection. The final paragraph read: Never seek applause for what love quietly accomplishes. The Father who sees in secret knows every act of compassion. If even one weary heart finds hope because you chose kindness today, then the day has already been worthwhile. Your soulmate closed their eyes. They could hardly believe what they had discovered. The person they had spent years misunderstanding had quietly become one of the strongest examples of humble faith they had ever encountered. For the first time in years, they felt completely overwhelmed. Not with fear. Not with confusion. But with conviction. Everything inside them cried out with the same realization. I was wrong. The drive home felt different from every journey they had taken before. The roads had not changed. The buildings remained exactly where they had always stood. Yet everything looked different because their heart had changed. They no longer wondered whether you had been misunderstood. They knew it. Every mile carried another memory. Every memory now looked different through the light of truth. They remembered your patience. Your quiet smile. Your willingness to forgive. Your habit of encouraging others before thinking about yourself. How had they overlooked something so obvious? Arriving home, they sat quietly beside the window as evening rain tapped gently against the glass. They opened a blank notebook. For several minutes they simply stared at the empty page. Finally they wrote 7 words that changed everything. I need to tell you the truth. Those words became the beginning of a letter unlike anything they had ever written. Not because they suddenly had all the answers, but because they had finally found the humility to admit they had been asking the wrong questions all along. Just as they finished the first paragraph, their phone vibrated. A message appeared from an unfamiliar number. It contained only one sentence. There is one more truth you still don't know about them. Meet me tomorrow before noon. Your soulmate looked from the phone to the unfinished letter. Their heart was racing. They thought the biggest discovery had already happened. They were wrong. The truth waiting for them the following day would completely transform everything they believed about your past, and leave them more shocked than they had ever imagined possible. My beloved child, remain here for a little while longer. Sometimes the Lord does His greatest work not by changing the world around us, but by changing the way we see the people He has placed in our lives. This is a fictional devotional reflection inspired by Christian themes of grace, humility, forgiveness, and truth. May it remind you that when pride gives way to humility, God often reveals blessings that were hidden in plain sight all along. Your soulmate barely slept that night. The message remained open on the screen beside the unfinished letter. There is one more truth you still don't know about them. Meet me tomorrow before noon. Those words echoed through every quiet moment. Who could possibly know something else? What truth had remained hidden after all these years? They had already discovered the journals. They had already read the volunteer reflections. They had already realized how deeply they had misunderstood your character. What more could there possibly be? As dawn slowly filled the room with soft light, your soulmate sat beside the window holding a warm cup of coffee. They opened their Bible before beginning the day and their eyes rested on a familiar verse. Be completely humble and gentle, be patient, bearing with one another in love. They smiled quietly. For years they had searched for certainty. Now they simply prayed for humility. Lord, if there is more I need to understand, help me receive it with a teachable heart. Remove every trace of pride from me. Let me see people the way you desire me to see them. Peace quietly replaced anxiety. The answers could wait. Their responsibility was simply to remain faithful. A little before noon they drove to the address attached to the message. It led them to a modest brick building on the edge of town. Above the entrance hung a simple sign. Hope Community Resource Center. The place looked familiar. Then they remembered. Years earlier your volunteer group had partnered with this ministry during several outreach events. Inside, the atmosphere felt warm and welcoming. Families waited patiently for assistance. Children colored pictures while volunteers prepared food parcels. Everyone seemed busy serving someone else. A middle-aged gentleman approached with a gentle smile. You must be the person I called. Your soulmate nodded. I am. I'm David. They shook hands. Thank you for coming. David led them into a quiet office overlooking the community garden. After closing the door, he opened a filing cabinet and carefully removed an old folder. I wasn't sure whether I should contact you, he admitted. But after organizing some archived records, I felt this belonged in your hands. Your soulmate looked at the folder. Across the front was your name. Their heart immediately began racing. David opened it. Inside were letters from families who had once received help through the ministry. Some thanked volunteers for delivering groceries. Others described prayers that had carried them through difficult seasons. Then David placed several handwritten notes on the desk. These were written by people who specifically asked that their gratitude be shared with the volunteer who helped them. Your soulmate began reading. The volunteer stayed with my husband in the hospital until I arrived. Another. They never wanted recognition. They simply prayed with us when our family felt hopeless. Another. They secretly paid for my daughter's school supplies after learning we couldn't afford them. Another. They visited my grandmother every week after everyone else forgot about her. Page after page revealed quiet acts of compassion. None of them had ever been announced publicly. None appeared on social media. No photographs had been taken. No applause had followed. Your soulmate slowly lowered the papers. I never knew. David smiled softly. Very few people did. They always asked us not to tell anyone. Silence filled the office. Not awkward silence. Holy silence. The kind that invites reflection. My beloved child, Jesus taught that the Father sees what is done in secret. True compassion does not depend upon recognition. It flows naturally from a heart transformed by grace. Never measure a person's character only by what the world celebrates. Often the greatest acts of love are witnessed by God alone. David reached for another envelope. "This is the reason I contacted you." Across the front someone had written, "Please keep this private unless it helps someone understand the truth." Inside rested a handwritten testimony from one of the ministry leaders. It read, "There is one volunteer whose quiet faith has influenced more people than they will probably ever know. They have never asked for credit. They have never sought attention. When donations were insufficient, they often gave from their own savings. When volunteers became discouraged, they stayed behind to pray with them. When hurting families needed encouragement, they listened without rushing them. If you ever question whether kindness matters, remember this servant." Your soulmate stopped reading. Their hands trembled. Every sentence described you. They struggled to find words. "I believed." They paused. "I believed I understood who they were." David nodded kindly. Many people thought they did. But very few knew the whole story. Tears quietly filled your soulmate's eyes. Not because they felt condemned. Because they felt convicted. For years they had accepted incomplete information. Now the truth stood before them with undeniable clarity. The person they had quietly admired all along had been living a life of hidden generosity that almost no one knew existed. David gently leaned forward. "There is something else." He opened a small wooden drawer. Inside rested a worn notebook. "This belonged to one of our pastors." Your soulmate carefully opened it. Most pages contained prayer requests, names, Bible verses, short reflections. Then one page immediately captured their attention. It simply read, "Please continue praying for the volunteer who keeps asking God to bless their friend even though they haven't spoken in a long time." Below those words appeared your name. Your soulmate stared silently. They continued reading. "They never ask us to pray that life becomes easier for themselves. They always ask us to pray for others. They especially continue praying for one friend they hope is doing well." No name was written. Yet your soulmate somehow knew. They closed the notebook. For several moments they could not speak. "My beloved child, never underestimate the quiet prayers offered in secret. Long after conversations end, faithful prayers continue rising before the Lord. Hearts shaped by His love often continue blessing others even when recognition never comes." Leaving the resource center felt completely different from arriving. The afternoon sunshine seemed brighter. Even the gentle breeze carried a strange sense of peace. Your soulmate no longer felt overwhelmed by regret alone. They felt inspired. Inspired to become more compassionate, more patient, more willing to love quietly without expecting anything in return. They sat on a nearby park bench and removed the unfinished letter from their jacket. Reading it again, they realized something. The letter was incomplete. Not because it lacked emotion. Because it lacked one important truth. Gratitude. They turned to a blank page and began writing again. "I recently discovered things about your life that I never knew. I learned how many people have been encouraged because of your kindness. I realized I accepted assumptions instead of seeking truth. I cannot change the past, but I can thank God for allowing me to finally see your character more clearly. Every sentence felt lighter. Every paragraph reflected genuine humility. For the first time, the letter no longer focused on regret. It celebrated gratitude. It honored the quiet faithfulness they had only now begun to understand. Just as they placed the pen down, their phone vibrated again. Another unexpected message appeared. This time it came from someone whose name immediately brought back years of memories. The message contained only one sentence. I found a box of old letters while cleaning today. One of them was addressed to you, but it was never mailed. I think you deserve to see it. Your soulmate looked toward the evening sky. They thought they had finally uncovered the whole truth. Yet another forgotten chapter was waiting. Somewhere inside that unopened letter rested words written years ago, words that would explain why your paths had separated, why silence lasted so long, and why God had never allowed the memory of your kindness to disappear from either heart. My beloved child, stay with me a little longer and quiet your heart. The Lord often teaches His children that truth is not revealed all at once. He uncovers it little by little, preparing hearts to receive it with wisdom instead of pride. This is a fictional devotional reflection inspired by Christian themes of grace, forgiveness, humility, and hope. Let it remind you that God is able to redeem seasons of misunderstanding and use them to shape hearts that reflect His love more deeply. The following morning, your soulmate woke before sunrise once again. The unopened letter rested on the kitchen table exactly where they had left it the night before. It was the letter an old friend had discovered while cleaning a forgotten storage box. A letter addressed to them. A letter that had never been mailed. For several minutes they simply stared at it. Questions filled their mind. Who had written it? Why had it never been sent? Would opening it finally explain everything that had remained unanswered for so many years? They slowly reached for the envelope. The paper had become slightly faded with time. The edges were worn. Someone had carefully protected it for years. Taking one deep breath, they gently broke the seal. Inside rested several folded pages. The handwriting was immediately familiar. It belonged to you. Their heart began beating faster. The first line read, "If you're reading this, then somehow this letter finally found you. I don't know how many years have passed, but I pray that wherever life has taken you, God has remained faithful." Your soulmate stopped reading for a moment. Already tears were beginning to form. The words felt warm. Peaceful. There was no anger. No accusation. Only kindness. They continued. "I've wanted to explain so many things, but every time I tried, it never seemed like the right moment. Eventually too much time passed, and I convinced myself silence would be easier than reopening old memories." Your soulmate lowered the page. Those words sounded painfully familiar. They had believed the very same thing. Different hearts. The same fear. The letter continued. "I often wondered if you believed I stopped caring. The truth is, I never stopped thanking God for the friendship we shared. Some people enter our lives for only a season, yet they leave lessons that remain forever. A tear quietly rolled down their cheek. For years they had imagined countless explanations. None had prepared them for this. There was no bitterness hidden inside these pages. Only gratitude. Only grace. Only quiet faith. My beloved child, forgiveness often begins long before reconciliation. The Lord teaches His children to release bitterness into His hands, trusting that He alone sees every part of the story. A heart surrendered to Him becomes free from the burden of resentment. Your soulmate kept reading. There were days I wanted to call. There were evenings I even picked up the phone. But every month that passed made the conversation feel more difficult. I prayed that if God ever wanted our paths to cross again, He would open the door in His perfect timing. Those sentences completely shattered every assumption your soulmate had carried. For years they believed silence meant indifference. Now they discovered silence had often been born from fear. Just like their own. Near the middle of the letter another paragraph captured their attention. I hope you've never doubted your value. You encouraged more people than you realized, including me. During one of the hardest seasons of my life, your kindness reminded me that God still places good people in unexpected places. Your soulmate closed their eyes. Every page seemed to reveal another truth they had never known. Not only had you remembered them, you had thanked God for them. You had prayed for them. You had chosen grace instead of blame. The letter continued for several more pages. It spoke about faith. About trusting God's timing. About learning that genuine friendship is measured not by how long people remain together but by how deeply they influence one another. Finally they reached the last page. The final paragraph simply read: If this letter never reaches you, that's all right. God already knows every word I wanted to say. But if someday it does, I hope only one thing, that you remember our story with gratitude instead of regret. The letter ended with a single Bible verse. Let all that you do be done in love. Your soulmate carefully folded the pages. The room remained completely silent. Not because there was nothing to say. Because every assumption had quietly fallen apart. For years they believed they had been forgotten. Instead, they discovered they had been remembered in prayer. My beloved child, the Lord delights in replacing lies with truth. The enemy often whispers that forgotten means unloved, but God reminds His children that love is frequently expressed in quiet ways the world never notices. Never underestimate the power of faithful prayers offered in secret. That afternoon your soulmate drove to the old community garden where so many volunteer projects had once begun. Everything seemed familiar. The stone pathways. The wooden benches. The flowering trees. They sat quietly beneath the large oak tree where both of you had once planned an outreach event together. Taking the letter from their pocket once more, they read it again. This time something different caught their attention. Near the bottom of one page, almost hidden in the margin, you had written a short prayer. Lord, bless them wherever they are. Give them joy, wisdom, and peace. Help them become everything you created them to be. Your soulmate whispered those words aloud. Then smiled. I've been praying almost the same thing. For the first time in years, regret no longer controlled the memory. Gratitude did. As they sat quietly, footsteps approached along the garden path. Turning around, they saw Mrs. Grace from the volunteer ministry. She smiled warmly. "I had a feeling I'd find you here." Your soulmate laughed softly. "It seems everyone keeps finding me." Mrs. Grace sat beside them. Without saying anything, your soulmate handed her the letter. She read it slowly. When she finished, she looked toward the garden before speaking. "I always believed both of you would understand the truth eventually. We wasted so much time." Mrs. Grace gently shook her head. "No. You spent time growing. There's a difference." Those simple words settled deeply into their heart. Perhaps she was right. If this conversation had happened years earlier, pride might have spoken louder than wisdom. Now both hearts had been softened by time. Both had learned humility. Both had learned patience. Both had learned that kindness matters more than being right. As the afternoon drew to a close, Mrs. Grace reached into her handbag. "I almost forgot." She handed your soulmate a small photograph. It had been taken on the final day both of you volunteered together. Everyone else in the picture smiled toward the camera. Neither of you did. Instead, both of you were helping a young child tie his shoelaces before the group photograph even began. Across the back someone had written, "The greatest acts of love are often the ones no camera truly captures." Your soulmate smiled through tears. So many reminders. Mrs. Grace nodded. God has been reminding you of who they really are. Just then the phone vibrated once more. Another message appeared. This time it came from your number. There were only 8 words. "I think it's finally time we talk face to face." Your soulmate looked at the screen for a long moment. Their hands trembled slightly. Not because they were afraid anymore, but because after years of unanswered questions, hidden letters, forgotten prayers, and unexpected discoveries, the conversation both hearts had quietly hoped for was finally about to begin. They slipped your letter safely into their jacket, stood from the bench, and looked toward the evening sky with a grateful smile. Whatever happened next, they knew one thing with complete certainty. God had not been wasting the years. He had been preparing 2 hearts to meet again with more humility, more compassion, and more grace than either of them had ever possessed before.